Hello everyone, I'm Hone, and it is time for another MTG Top 10. Normally, I only do them on Friday, but the last few weeks I've been getting out two a week, one on Wednesday and one on Friday. This will probably be the last week I do two for a while, but for now, we're doing a Top 10 on Mana Dorks. Last week I ran a poll between Vanilla Creatures and Mana Dorks that ended in a virtual tie, so I did Vanilla Creatures last Friday and I'm doing Mana Dorks today. What is a mana dork, you ask? Well, I went with a pretty strict definition of what a mana dork is. For me, it had to be a 1-mana creature capable of producing mana on turn 2. One creature that some may consider a mana dork but doesn't fit this qualification is something like Dryad Arbor. As a land and a creature, it has to take up one of your land drops on your turn, and for that reason, it doesn't actually make sure you have 3 mana on turn 2 the way most mana dorks can. Mana dorks have a long history in Magic and are often quite powerful. With the recent news that Llanowar Elves is coming back in Dominaria, it seems like a good time to take a look back at the mana dorks who had the biggest impact on the competitive scene. Now, let's get started after a quick reminder on how I scored things. Pro Tour, Legacy, and Vintage top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's move to number 10. At number 10, we have a card that might stretch the definition of mana dork a little bit in Joraga Treespeaker. While capable of producing mana on turn 2, you have to pump mana into it for it to do that. That said, it immediately gives you back the 2 mana you spend to level it up. It has seen a lot of play in ramp decks over the years, but only managed to break through with the top 8 once, in an Eldrazi ramp deck at Worlds in 2010. At number 9, we have Elves of Deep Shadow, which is capable of producing black mana instead of the usual green for mana elves. It was printed way back in the dark, but didn't actually see much play until it was reprinted in Ravnica. From there, it managed a top 8 in a bug control deck in Standard, as well as a top 8 in an extended in an elf-heavy combo deck that sought to play as many elves that produce mana as possible, along with Glimpse of Nature, in order to power out a lethal Grape Shot. Glimpse of Nature was subsequently banned and extended, so Elves of Deep Shadow never did anything again after that. At number 8, we have a more recent mana dork, one that is emblematic of Wizards' more recent policy on them. There can't be 1-mana mana dorks who can produce mana all their own. Of course, this has been turned on its head with the announcement that Llanowar Elves will be in Dominaria, but Loam Dryad, while a mana dork, does require the help of another creature to produce mana. The payoff, well, it can produce mana of any color, and it has more toughness than most mana dorks. While in Standard, it saw a lot of play in decks running Cryptolith Right, as both it and the Right operated on the same axis. Both gave you mana if you could go wide. The deck sought to make a ton of mana using Cryptolith Right, and then use an infinite combo involving Brood Monitor, Eldrazi Displacer, and Zulaport Cutthroat. The combo kill wasn't the only way the deck could win, though, as it was also capable of just running you over with a swarm of creatures, or turning Westvale Abbey into Ormondal. The deck had a relatively short life in Standard, really only being a Tier 1 deck from April to June of 2016, and Loam Dryad hasn't seen play since then. At number 7, we have a mana dork that produces colorless mana, Boreal Druid. That colorless mana is a little more useful than most, though, because Boreal Druid is a snow creature. The mana it produces counts as snow mana, so you can use it for things like Mouth of Ronam's activated ability. Like all mana dorks, Boreal Druid has seen a decent amount of play. It benefited from being legal in the same Standard as Lorwyn, which was a tribal set that had elves as one of its supported tribes, and all 11 points it put up in that Standard format were in elf decks. The most impressive showings it had were at Worlds in 2007 and Pro Tour Hollywood in 2008. At both events, it put up 2 top 8s. After rotating out of Standard, it managed to put up 1 Grand Prix top 8 at Grand Prix Oakland in 2010, which was an extended Grand Prix, but it hasn't seen any play since then. At number 6, we have a mana dork who can't actually produce mana on its own, and that is Arbor Elf. Instead of producing mana, it can untap forests. This makes it a little more narrow than most mana dorks, but as long as you make sure your deck has a lot of forests in it, it'll pretty much do the same thing. While in Standard it saw play in a ton of decks with green in them, since, like most mana dorks, it enabled you to play 3 and 4 drops 1 turn earlier. This included in Reanimator decks in which Arbor Elf could help cast in Burial Rites a turn earlier, as well as Selesnya aggro and Jund mid-range decks. At number 5, we have a mana dork who isn't an elf or a dryad, but a human, and that is Avacyn's Pilgrim. 1-mana mana dorks always see play in Standard, and Avacyn's Pilgrim is no exception to that. Playing 3 drops on turn 2, 4 drops on turn 3, etc. is just incredibly good, and that's what makes all the cards on this list see play. The Pilgrim was dominant in block, showing up in 6 of the top 8 decks at the Block Pro Tour, all of which were aggro. This included Naya decks, Band decks, and Green-White decks, all of which used the Pilgrim to more quickly play their more powerful creatures. Standard was also good for Avacyn's Pilgrim. It showed up in aggro decks there too, including Green-White, Bant, and Naya once again. But it also saw play in Birthing Pod decks, which, with the Pilgrim's help, could play their pod as early as turn 2. It also saw play in various Reanimator decks where it could let you cast a reanimation spell, which in this case was on Burial Rites, a turn early. It has also seen a bit of play in Modern, with one Grand Prix Top 8 in Birthing Pod, and just this year it found its way into a few Grand Prix Top 8s in Coral Helm Humans decks, which is basically a human aggro deck that also runs the Coral Helm combo. And it's also starting to see play in the more aggressive human decks that don't run the combo and have recently become Tier 1 in Modern. At number 4, I included 3 cards, because they all would have made the list on their own, but are all functionally the same. So that would have made for a very interesting list. All are 1 green mana for a 1/1 elf who can make a single green mana, and they are Llanowar Elves, Fyndhorn Elves, and Elvish Mystic. Of the 3, Llanowar Elves has the score that would be enough to make it number 4, meanwhile Fyndhorn Elves would have come in at number 7, and Elvish Mystic would have been number 5. Llanowar Elves, along with Birds of Paradise, is one of the original mana dorks printed way back in Alpha. It has been reprinted a ton of times, giving it legality across a lot of formats and allowing it to see play in Standard multiple times. Llanowar Elves has a resume spanning all 25 years of Magic's history, and as a result, we really don't want to spend a lot of time talking about all the different decks that it has seen play in. It first saw play at Magic's very first Worlds Tournament in 1994, and it has never really stopped seeing play, managing at least one Premier Event Top 8 in every single year since Magic's inception, which is not a feat a lot of cards can claim. Standard, thanks to multiple printings, is where it has seen the most play, and I think it is a safe bet that Dominario will bolster its score and help it maybe climb up this list a little bit further. The decks to feature it in Standard over the years have included Zoo, Stompy, White Green, and Urnum-Geddon. In these decks, it allows you to play more powerful creatures more quickly, the way Mana Dorks do. Later Standard decks included Fires of Yavimaya during Invasion Standard, Ghazi Glare during Ravnica Standard, and Elf decks during Lorwyn Standard. In Modern, Extended, and Legacy, its primary home has been in Elf tribal decks. Fyndhorn Elves, while functionally the same, doesn't have the same resume due to not being printed nearly as often, and not even being legal in Modern. It was only printed in a standard legal set once, in Ice Age, so its window of opportunity is nowhere near as large as Llanowar Elves has been. It fills the same role as Llanowar Elves did, and some decks in Extended and Legacy actually ran 4 copies of both, making their ability to play a 3-mana creature on turn 2 pretty consistent. Elvish Mystic is of course the most recent of the trio, and while not reprinted at the same rate as Llanowar Elves, it has been printed twice, in both Magic 2014 and 2015, which gave it 2 shots at Standard. And like Llanowar Elves, it has constantly seen play ever since being printed, though it was first printed in 2013, so it doesn't have as long of a track record. Standard has been its primary home, where it has notably been part of Devotion to Green decks, Jund Aggro, and Abzan decks. It sees play in Modern too, alongside its big brother Llanowar Elves in Elf decks. At number 3, we have one of the best 1-drops in the history of Magic, Deathrite Shaman. There aren't many mana dorks who are also win conditions, but that is what Deathrite Shaman gives you. This thing does a lot for the mana you pay. A 1/2 body plus the ability to act as a mana dork, do the last damage to your opponent, or gain yourself some life. Despite how powerful it was, it didn't see a huge amount of play in Standard. It certainly saw some, primarily in decks that like to fill their graveyard like Reanimator, which meant the Deathrite Shaman could be fueled for a while. It also saw play in Jund, Reanimator, and Zombie decks. But where it really shines is in formats with fetch lands, where the Deathrite Shaman is basically a Llanowar Elves on steroids, since it can help you ramp while also having those other 2 useful activated abilities. In Modern, it saw play alongside Bloodbraid Elf and Jund decks, but also saw play in Birthing Pod decks. It and Bloodbraid Elf eventually made Jund way too powerful, and both of them got banned out of Modern. Unlike Bloodbraid Elf, though, the Shaman hasn't been unbanned, and the Shaman has been powerful enough in other formats to see consistent play in formats like Legacy and Vintage. In Legacy, the Shaman sees play mostly in decks that run Delver of Secrets, such as Grixis Delver and Shardless Bug. It continues to perform impressively there, and is basically the format's top mana dork, and arguably one of its most defining creatures, for example, most recently appearing in 6 of the top 8 decks at 2017's North America Legacy Championships, and 3 of the top 8 decks at Grand Prix Madrid just a few weeks ago. It will continue to climb up on this list, although the card at number 2 is also seeing a ton of play. At number 2, we have a creature that has displaced Llanowar Elves in large part in Modern, as it is by most measures a more powerful card, and that is Noble Hierarch. Sure, it's only a 0/1, but it comes with the Exalted mechanic, and can produce 3 different colors of mana. That brings a lot more to the board than Llanowar Elves does. Basically, it is the mana dork of choice in Modern decks that don't care about the elf creature type. While it saw play in Standard, it has more than 100 of its points in non-standard formats. While on Standard, it saw play in Dora and the Siege Tower decks, Mythic Conscription, and Bant midrange. It saw a bit of play in Extended too, while that format still existed in decks like Vengevine and Zoo. As I suggested a moment ago, Modern is its biggest home, and it sees a heavy play there. Its early time in Modern meant it was part of Birthing Pod decks, which, with the help of the Hierarch, could play the pod as early as turn 2. It also saw play in Infect decks, as it gave you more mana to use combat tricks while also pumping your creatures with Infect when they attacked alone, which is typically what Infect decks want to do anyway. After Pod got banned, it has seen play in its successors, Court of Calling and Collected Company decks. Most recently, it has found its way into the human decks that have recently emerged as Tier 1 at the most recent Pro Tour, where the fact that it isn't an elf actually comes in handy. It also sees a lot of play in Legacy, having put up strong finishes in Blue-Green and Green-White Madness decks, Survival of the Fittest decks, Show and Tell, and various bug decks. While it is a heavily played mana dork in Legacy, it isn't the top mana dork in that format like it is in Modern. That honor, of course, goes to Deathrite Shaman. At number 1, we have another mana dork from Magic's very first set, Birds of Paradise. A 0 mana 0/1 with flying that can tap to add mana of any color, the bird was, for a long time, considered the best mana dork in the game. One could argue that today it has been surpassed by Deathrite Shaman and maybe even Noble Hierarch. But for almost 2 decades, Birds of Paradise was the gold standard for a mana dork, and its historical dominance is enough for it to currently be number 1 on this list. Like Llanowar Elves, it has seen play ever since the game began, and it has been reprinted tons of times, so going over every deck it has ever been seen play in would be quite boring, so we'll look at some of its greatest hits. It has seen play in many different standard environments thanks to the reprints seeing play, like Llanowar Elves, at Magic's very first competitive tournament ever, Worlds in 1994, where it appeared in 4 of the top 8 deck lists. Its dominance would continue throughout the years, seeing play in Fires of Yavimaya and Opposition decks in the early 2000s, in Fairies and Doran decks in the mid-2000s, and in Kessig Titan decks in the early 2010s. In Modern, it saw play in Birthing Pod, and like Noble Hierarch, it has transitioned into Collected Company and Court of Calling decks since Birthing Pod was banned. The bird will continue to see play in Modern, but both Deathrite Shaman and Noble Hierarch are seeing play at a higher rate now, and if things continue as they are, the bird, who does have a sizable lead thanks to being so much older than those 2 cards, could lose its spot at the top of this list. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. I'll be back this Friday with another one. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.